Ever since the first Star Wars film was released 45 years ago, the world simply cannot get enough Star Wars, and it's easy to see why. There are just too many things that make Star Wars uber special, and if you thought this iconic pop cultural phenomenon of a franchise was dead, you couldn't be more wrong. So stay tuned, don't go away, because Star Wars has confirmed about a future sequel trilogy era movie plan. First up, what are the future sequel trilogy era movie plans? You're about to find out. Writer-director Patty Jenkins' film titled Rogue Squadron has been further pushed out from its original December 2023 release date due to creative differences with the screenplay. And the movie Taika Waititi is developing with Krysty Wilson-Cairns will be the next Star Wars movie you see on the big screen. At the time of this recording, there's no official release date for when you can expect to see it. However, Lucasfilm president Kathleen Kennedy said to the studio it's hoping for late 2023, but that nothing was actually locked in. Marvel boss Kevin Feige and the creator of Loki, Michael Waldron, are working on a top-secret Star Wars movie too, but nothing's been officially announced. According to Waldron, the film will be a standalone adventure that's not necessarily a sequel and doesn't have a bunch of TV shows and movies that you're servicing on top of it. Now, that is what die-hard Star Wars fans want. Kathleen Kennedy also revealed some juicy details about what fans could expect from future Star Wars films and said, "We're moving further beyond the existing sequels as we look to our movie space. The sequel era is what we talk a lot about in terms of where we're going with our movies, and just far out how far we'll go from that. And that's very much the space we're concentrating on." One thing we know for sure is that Kennedy will not hesitate to explore beyond the Skywalker saga and wants to create an entirely new saga, a tremendously ambitious goal indeed. Next up is Star Wars Shadow of the Sith, the prequel that the sequel trilogy fans needed all along. Let's take a look. Back in 2019, Lucasfilm released Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker into theaters, effectively bringing the Star Wars sequel trilogy and Skywalker saga to a close. As is usually the case, Star Wars fans are notoriously difficult to please, and they were split on the film. Those who disliked the film said it felt overstuffed, and the critical fans had hoped that the film would build on what was done in Star Wars The Last Jedi, and weren't thrilled to see the film introduce several new storylines into the trilogy's story. Storylines such as the introduction of the Sith planet Exegol and the role of Oki of Bestune. What the writers were essentially doing was creating an entirely new narrative framework onto the story of the three films. But here's where things take a turn. Star Wars Shadow of the Sith, a new novel by author Adam Christopher, hopes to integrate the Rise of Skywalker's late additions into the classic Star Wars mythos. And this new novel will create a missing chapter of the sequel's trilogy story. Shadow of the Sith starts 13 years before Star Wars The Force Awakens and focuses on Rey's parents, Miramar, and her husband, Dathan, the son of Emperor Palpatine. Lando Calrissian also comes into the story, while Luke Skywalker and Lor San Tekka search the galaxy for Jedi and Sith artifacts. Luke soon encounters a Sith villain unlike anything he's ever seen, and eventually cross paths with Lando for an adventure, which is mentioned briefly in The Rise of Skywalker. Up next, is Disney willing to take that big risk with its own Star Wars franchise? When Rogue Squadron was originally announced, producers said they would move the saga into the future era of the galaxy. Kennedy suggests that this is the plan for all the films in development. Recently, the films have stretched over 100 years after the original trilogy and have introduced fans to the descendants of both Luke and Leia, plus all new characters, Sith villains, and some explosive intergalactic battles. However, some argue that setting a film so far beyond any recognizable characters will alienate the fans, who simply want more of the same heroes and villains that they know and love. And when it comes to show business, as the old saying goes, you've got to give them what they want. Of course, them means fans. And that's why Lucasfilms is currently testing the High Republic, a line of books and comics set 200 years before The Phantom Menace, when the Skywalkers and Palpatines of the galaxies weren't even around. A number of High Republic novels have landed at the top of the bestseller list, which appears to suggest that there is a desire from fans for Star Wars to break away from familiar storylines and characters. But in the High Republic comic books, you'll notice a familiar face in form of a 700-year-old Master Yoda. The biggest test of all, though, will be the Acolyte, a new Disney Plus series set in High Republic era and 100 years before the original films take place. Stay tuned and don't go away, because we're revealing the latest Star Wars details and news. Next up is Netflix on a quest to find its inner Star Wars. You're about to find out. The $82 billion streaming service wants to emulate the success of Star Wars by building its own brands that cross all forms of media, film, television, games, and consumer products. Matthew Thunell, the Netflix VP who founded Stranger Things, says, "We want to have our version of Star Wars or our version of Harry Potter, and we're working very hard to build that, but those are not built overnight." In other words, Netflix is now on the hunt for its own version of Star Wars. Part of me feels like saying, yeah, good luck with that. However, I think that would be a cynical stance to take here. Why? Because there are literally millions of books and screenplays out there waiting and begging to be read by studio execs, literary agents, and managers, and I have to believe that out of those millions of books and scripts, there are hundreds of diamonds in the rough out there. They're just as mind-blowingly awesome as Star Wars or even Star Trek. There's so much content out there just waiting waiting to be discovered, sitting on a shelf somewhere and collecting dust. Like extraterrestrial life, I have to believe that something is out there. What do you think of Netflix trying to find its own Star Wars? Are they trying too hard? Do you think it's a lost cause and they're simply wasting their time? Or like me, do you think it's possible for Netflix to find its own version of Star Wars? I just think they should stop comparing Star Wars and Star Trek. Drop a comment below and let us know what you think. Up next, what was one of the most important scenes from Return of the Jedi that caused a plot hole decades later? Let's take a look. For many Star Wars fans, there's nothing quite as annoying as a big fat plot hole, especially an obvious one. To understand this plot hole, you'll need some context. You'll have to think back to the end of one of the most famous scenes in Return of the Jedi. Just before Luke Skywalker heads off to face Darth Vader and the Emperor, he has to reveal a long-buried secret to Princess Leia about who she really is. The audience learned of the news several scenes earlier on Dagobah, and that Luke and Leia are brother and sister, but no one knows how Leia will take the news. In the Ewok village on the planet Endor, Luke asks Leia if she has any memory of her mother, because she desperately wants to learn about his own, and Leia says, just a little bit. She died when I was very young. Just images, really. Feelings. She was very beautiful, kind, but sad. This is when Luke reveals the truth about their family. Leia is stunned, but replies that she has always had a feeling Luke was her brother. And Luke warns Leia that if he fails to stop the Emperor and bring their father Anakin back to the good side, she will be the galaxy's last hope. Finally, has Star Wars finally addressed one of its biggest ever plot holes? You're about to find out. The impact of the twist in the scene from Return of the Jedi had a profound impact on the future of Star Wars, and it also set the stage for one of the key storylines of the prequel trilogy. Lucas's second trilogy needed to end with the birth of the Skywalker twins and Anakin's transformation into Darth Vader. However, it needed to explain what happened to Luke and Leia's mother and why only Leia and not Luke remembered Padme. In 2005's Revenge of the Sith, these plot lines were finally addressed, and while the final prequel film gave some satisfactory answers to fans about the origins of Luke, Leia, and Vader, it also created a controversial plot hole that Star Wars fans have been hotly debating ever since. So here's the problem. If Padme Amidala died giving birth to Luke and Leia, how can Princess Leia remember anything at all about Padme by the time Return of the Jedi, which takes place 25 years after Revenge of the Sith on the Star Wars timeline? It seems like the Revenge of the Sith contradicted this pivotal scene in Return of the Jedi and ruined a classic moment in the original trilogy. A Star Wars novel called The Princess and the Scoundrel finally revealed how Leia can recall memories of Padme from Revenge of the Sith. So how was she able to remember her mother? Well, it was all thanks to the Force within her. That's a wrap for our video. Thanks for watching.